The alien princess wasn't prepared for my arrival, and her response spoke volumes. I jolted awake to the crackle of alarms and the violent shudder of my starship's failing engines. Through the cockpit window, I caught sight of a violet-hued planet looming far closer than it should have been. My ship, the Venture's wing, had lost power in its thrusters and was spiraling toward the atmosphere with a momentum I couldn't fully control. Within minutes, I had no choice but to engage emergency landing protocols on the unknown surface. Clouds parted around me, revealing an otherworldly landscape of crystalline spires that reflected the dim starlight, creating soft ribbons of color across plains of dust and stone. All the while, my heart pounded as I wrestled with the controls and prayed the hull would hold together long enough to touch down in one piece. When I finally felt the ship scrape and bump along a rugged outcropping, a sense of relief flooded me, followed by immediate apprehension. I was stranded, potentially injured, and I had no idea what kind of inhabitants dwelled here. The planet, which my logs labeled as Acheron, shimmered with an almost mystical glow. Once the initial shock subsided, I unstrapped myself and pulled on a standard-issue environmental suit. Venturing outside, I found the air breathable. My handheld sensor confirmed it, though it was enriched with higher levels of certain gases compared to Earth. The sky overhead was a murky purple, and the ring of crystals surrounding me refracted the faint sun so that subtle rainbows danced at the edges of my vision. As I took my first few steps across the rocky terrain, I noticed some kind of structure in the distance, shaped like a temple or shrine. My ship's hull was bent and cracked. The engine was beyond immediate repair. If I hoped to return home, I'd need help. Perhaps that temple was my best chance at finding someone or something that could assist. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of trespassing. Every instinct told me this place was sacred. Strange echoes in the distance made my hair stand on end, as though a silent chorus of watchers hovered just out of sight. I climbed over a crag of iridescent rock to approach what I now recognized as a sprawling temple complex. Its architecture was unlike anything I had seen. Columns of translucent material soared high, each one etched with glyphs that pulsed with faint internal light. Large archways opened into halls lit by flickering orbs, which cast dancing shadows along the floor. The hush of this place was almost oppressive, as if even the wind dared not disturb the sanctity of these halls. My boots clicked against a smooth walkway, and the moment I passed under the first arch, a tremor of tension rippled through my body. I realized I was uninvited, an intruder who had crash-landed onto a civilization's doorstep. Before I could decide whether to retreat and reconsider, figures stepped into view from the far side of the chamber. Their postures were poised and defensive, wearing what looked like shimmering armor. At the front stood a tall woman with elongated limbs, her skin a soft pearl gray tinged with blue. A crest of gem-like protrusions decorated her forehead, and her eyes shone with an intensity that made my breath hitch. She didn't carry a weapon that I could see, but her stance suggested she needed none. The faint swirl of color across her chest plate glowed in time with her pulse, or so it seemed, and there was no mistaking the regal presence that radiated from her. I had never felt so foreign, so small and unprepared in all my life. My attempts to speak were met with wariness. The tall woman lifted a hand, and a hush fell over the room. Her voice, when she spoke, reverberated in a melodic yet stern register. "How dare you enter this sacred place without sanction?" I fumbled to find an explanation, trying to convey in halting phrases that my arrival was accidental, my ship a wreck, my intentions peaceful. The woman introduced herself as Princess Atire, heir to the throne of Acheron. But I could see in her face that my presence here could be seen as a desecration of something holy. When I glanced over my shoulder, I noticed a small orb floating near the wall. It blinked, flickered, and then fell to the floor with a crackle of sparks. Atire's expression shifted from anger to confusion, but her mistrust was evident. A hush cloaked the chamber as her guards tensed around me, ready for her signal. My mind raced through every protocol I'd practiced for first contact scenarios. Often we humans tried to greet unknown species with open palms, a show of peace. So, with heart pounding, I lifted both hands. Her expression hardened, suggesting that any misstep might seal my fate. Yet I wasn't met with immediate hostility. Instead, Princess Atire tilted her head in what might have been curiosity or a silent question. She gave an order in her own tongue, beautiful, haunting syllables, and her guards lowered their weapons slightly. One guard, a woman with markings across her cheeks and a tall spear clutched in her gauntleted hand, moved behind me with a watchful glare. In a forced calm, I explained again that I needed help, that my starship was damaged. I spoke of Earth, though it seemed they already knew of my kind in some capacity. The subtle flinch that crossed Atire's face told me she had heard of humans and not in a favorable light. Something about takers, a term spat out by a second guard, implied a deep-rooted resentment. Before I could ask for clarification, Atire directed me to follow them deeper into the temple, a place I would soon learn was called the Shrine of Echoes. My presence had clearly disrupted some kind of ritual, and the tension that followed me felt like a lead weight upon my shoulders. I had no idea that these first moments would spark a chain of events that would challenge an entire planet's traditions and lead me to become entwined in a conflict for which neither the princess nor I were truly prepared. They took me to what could only be described as a grand hall. Crystalline pillars curved overhead, forming a dome through which swirling cosmic lights entered. Here an assembly waited, men and women dressed in ornate robes, their gazes flicking with suspicion when they saw me. Atire stepped onto a dais and announced my arrival in a resonant voice that I struggled to understand. From the crowd stepped an elder figure in heavily decorated robes, marked with swirling patterns that glimmered in the subdued light. He introduced himself, though I only caught the name Darren. Counselor Darren's expression was severe, and from the instant he turned his eyes on me, I sensed contempt. He wasted no time questioning what business I had on Acheron, implying that humans were known to barge into worlds, strip resources, and disappear once they had what they wanted. The word takers echoed in the air again, this time with sharper vitriol. I tried to defend myself, offering the simplest truth: my crash was unintentional, I had no mission from Earth, and I was alone. But Darren scoffed, and others murmured in agreement. Something about the mention of Earth's technology set them on edge. Then, to my surprise, Atire did not immediately condemn me. She raised one hand, her armor glimmering, and said they would evaluate my claims before making any judgment. She also declared that the Council had more pressing matters to deal with, namely, the weakening of the planet's life force, something she referred to as the heart's core. It was apparently a source of energy that sustained Acheron's environment, ensuring the viability of their crops and regulating the planet's climate. Yet now, as rumor had it, the core was in danger. When Darren turned on her for changing the subject, she let a hint of steel into her voice. "We cannot solve every matter at once, Counselor. The core's deterioration grows worse daily. If this outsider can help, even unwittingly, we owe it to ourselves to find out." Her stance was precarious, caught between the traditions that demanded humans be kept at bay and the desperation that came from a planet on the brink of collapse. In that moment, the flicker in her eyes suggested a person who carried a burden she never felt ready to bear. And I, Troy Harrison, crash-landed unannounced, was now embroiled in that burden. Once the council meeting adjourned, Atire had me escorted to a quiet chamber where I was told to remain until summoned. It was a starkly beautiful room with walls that shimmered in faint patterns, almost like luminescent script. The guard who brought me there said nothing. She left me with a small tray of unfamiliar food and a pitcher of water tinged slightly green, yet surprisingly refreshing. Exhausted from the day's ordeal, I drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by images of the planet's swirling sky and the sense that something malevolent lurked beneath the surface. When I woke, hours had passed, and a different guard stood outside the chamber. He instructed me to follow him to another part of the palace. As we wandered through corridors lined with more of the glowing glyphs, I began to sense the depth of Acheron's culture. Each passage told a story in carved reliefs, battles with a shadowy creature, the sealing of an ancient evil, the coronation of a line of monarchs, culminating in the rule of Atyre's mother, who, from the images, must have reigned for centuries. We arrived at a wide balcony open to the violet sky. Atyre stood there, leaning on a railing of twisted crystal. The look in her eyes when she turned to me was softer than before, though overshadowed by worry. She asked me about Earth, about how we use technology to regulate our own climate. I mentioned orbital solar reflectors, terraforming on certain colonies, advanced renewable systems. She listened intently before sighing. "Much of this is precisely why many of my people call you takers," she said. "They believe your kind manipulates nature without reverence." I tried to explain that not all humans were the same, but she waved me off, gazing over the city. "Acheron has always thrived through harmony with the core," she said. "But it's failing, or rather, it's being sabotaged." Her voice dropped. "Darren insists it's a natural decline. Others whisper of conspiracies. My mother always taught me that if the core is threatened, the planet itself will rebel and an ancient shadow will stir." Something in her voice trembled. She had to appear strong, but deep down, fear gnawed at her. She turned to me then. "You speak of Earth's solutions. If you have any knowledge, any tool that might stabilize the core, I would consider it, though I know Darren will challenge me. He thinks trusting an outsider is folly." I promised to do what I could, though in truth my knowledge was limited to starship mechanics and basic energy systems. Still, Atyre seemed desperate enough to let me try. She looked away again, and in a hushed tone she asked, "Did you come here for a reason, Troy? Some fate beyond your crash?" I had no easy answer. For now, I simply said, "Sometimes fate finds us when we're not ready." The next day, we traveled to the outskirts of the capital, a region where the ground opened into a labyrinth of fissures. I had cobbled together a rudimentary scanner from my starship's salvage, hoping to detect any anomalies in the planet's energy distribution. The moment we set foot on that land, I felt an undercurrent of vibration. Atyre explained that the planet's core channeled its energy through these channels. They were typically stable, but over the past year, readings had plummeted in certain spots. If the sabotage rumor was true, this region was a prime target. A few palace engineers, tall, slender beings with luminous eyes, accompanied us, measuring flux data. We discovered signs of forced extraction, scorched crystal surfaces, residue from an alien alloy, and odd patterns in the ground that suggested large machinery had been installed and removed recently. One engineer paused at a crater edge, tapping her instrument, and declared that the place had been drained of an alarming volume of ambient energy. If the same was being done on a larger scale, the planet's ecosystem would soon be irreparably damaged. Suddenly, one of the engineers yelled out, pointing at a flicker of motion along a rocky ridge. Atyre and I sprinted in that direction, only to catch a glimpse of a cloaked figure retreating into a hidden tunnel. We gave chase, descending into darkness lit only by the faint glow of Acheron's crystal-laden walls. The chase was brief, but revealed something even more worrisome. A clandestine chamber deep below the surface, cluttered with contraband devices, presumably used to siphon energy from the core. Before we could confront the figure, they vanished through a side passage that collapsed behind them. Atyre cursed softly in her own language, frustration evident. We examined the leftover equipment, and I recognized certain design elements reminiscent of Earth-based technology. My stomach lurched at the idea that someone might be framing humans or using stolen tech to carry out their scheme. When Atyre found a shard of metallic plating labeled in an old Earth dialect, her gaze turned to me, suspicion flickering. "Explain this," she demanded. I assured her I was as surprised as she was, but the seed of doubt took root in her mind. Still, she reined in her anger and said we would bring the evidence back to the palace. On our way out, the faint echoes of a distant rumble reverberated through the tunnel. Atyre froze, whispering, "The shadow stirs." I didn't know what she meant, but the way her face paled suggested that the very planet might soon be in the throes of a deeper crisis. We returned to the palace late in the evening. The regal halls were bathed in pale illumination from orbs hovering near the ceilings, and the tension among the courtiers was palpable. Word had spread quickly of our discovery in the tunnels. People whispered about traitors within their midst, about outsiders with malicious intent, about the possibility of a centuries-old prophecy coming true. Counselor Darren met us at the main corridor and demanded an explanation. When Atire showed him the earth-plated medal, he turned on me with a venomous glare. "I knew it," he snarled. "Humans bring only chaos." Princess Atire, to my surprise, defended me, albeit briefly. She explained that I had helped uncover the sabotage equipment. Nonetheless, Darren insisted that my involvement was precisely the reason such technology was on the planet to begin with. A shouting match ensued between Darren and several other council members, with some calling for my immediate confinement. Atire silenced them with a raised hand, her armor flaring like a living prism. Her voice resonated across the hall. If Troy were truly complicit, would he have risked himself to reveal this plot? We have no time for scapegoating. The core suffers now. Our survival demands unity, not blame. I felt gratitude and guilt in equal measure. Gratitude that she spoke on my behalf. Guilt because I suspected that Earth's technology had indeed found its way here, possibly through illegal trade or infiltration. The friction in the hall was thick as any fog. Finally, Darren relented enough to let me continue assisting in the investigation, but his eyes promised that one misstep would seal my fate. Exhausted, I retreated to my chamber once more. That night, I dreamed of a swirling darkness coiled beneath the planet's surface, feeding off the world's fear. In the dream, I saw a monstrous silhouette, a creature with pulsing red fissures along its form, devouring the planet's light. I woke in a cold sweat, half convinced it was more than a dream. The faint patterns on my chamber walls seemed to tremble, and for a fleeting second, I thought I heard a voice whisper my name. It was only my imagination, I told myself. Yet, I couldn't entirely believe that. The next few days, we rallied the palace engineers, the best minds Acheron had to offer, to form a task force. We studied the contraband devices we had salvaged, hoping to trace them to their origins. Many components bore a unique signature that allowed me to cross-reference them with starship engineering principles from Earth. My suspicion deepened. These pieces might have been smuggled or stolen from interplanetary merchants. Meanwhile, Atire busied herself with the responsibilities of leadership she had once admitted feeling unprepared for. She stood before her people in the grand square, where shimmering towers guided refracted sunlight into colorful arcs overhead. The assembled crowd looked anxious, their eyes drifting from her to me, the stranger by her side. But she addressed them with surprising composure, announcing that sabotage threatened the core and that they, as a united kingdom, must stand against it. Though she didn't mention me by name in her speech, the very fact she let me stand beside her spoke volumes about the trust she was trying to cultivate. After the speech, however, the mood in the square grew more tumultuous. A group of citizens confronted her. One, an older woman with an elaborate crest of crystals along her temples, demanded to know why a human was allowed such proximity to the princess. Another asked how they could be sure this wasn't just Earth's plan to quietly sap Acheron's resources. Atire's response carried a gravitas that surprised even me. "You doubt me, I understand. But ask yourselves, who would stand against any threat if we let fear dictate our every action? Atire's traditions have protected us for centuries, yet times change. The core is fading now, and denial will not save us." Her speech simmered in the air. Some accepted her words, others grumbled, yet no one openly defied her. Counselor Darren watched from the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, a scowl etched into his features. As the crowd dispersed, Atire's shoulders sagged in fatigue. She caught my gaze for a moment, letting an unspoken tension pass between us. In that silent exchange, I recognized the heavy load of leadership she bore. Though I had only been here a short time, I felt a swell of responsibility for her, for this planet, and for a crisis that might be bigger than either of us realized. The breakthrough came unexpectedly one afternoon as I worked with two palace engineers, Havar and Sial, who had patched together an ancient scanning device from the archives, combining it with my improvised Earth-Tech sensors. We picked up an energy signature emanating from below the city's eastern quarter, near an abandoned watchtower. The readings indicated not just the presence of siphoning machinery, but a deeper anomaly that fluctuated in an almost heartbeat-like pattern. Atire insisted on joining the expedition despite Darren's protests. She took a small escort of guards, and we ventured through labyrinthine streets into the older part of the capital, where spires were chipped and sections of the city had fallen into disrepair. Eventually we reached the watchtower, half crumbled, with vines of glowing crystal weaving through the stone. A concealed trapdoor led us into a musty subterranean passage. The deeper we descended, the more oppressive the atmosphere grew. The crystals on the walls were dark, and an eerie hush cloaked the corridor. Then we heard voices, quiet, tense voices. From a hidden chamber we spied a group of Acheron rebels. Their leader, a man named Rake, wore battered armor stripped of royal insignias. He was showing a newly arrived ally, a hooded figure, how they planned to divert energy from the heart's core. Rake ranted about how the monarchy had grown weak, how reliance on the core made them complacent. He claimed that unleashing the shadow, a being once sealed by Atire's ancestors, was the only way to force a rebirth of Acheron. My blood ran cold at the mention of the shadow. Atire's guard stepped forward, outraged, but a slip of her boot on loose rubble gave us away. Rake's men whirled, weapons raised. The next moments blurred in a flurry of motion. Atire's guards lunged to protect her. I ducked behind a fallen column, and the corridor exploded with the crackle of energy blasts. My makeshift scanner clattered to the floor. Through the haze, I glimpsed Atire hurling a bright lance of energy from her armor's forearm plating, a technology I hadn't realized she possessed. She struck one of Rake's cronies, but more rushed in. A swirling device at the room's center suddenly whirred to life, tearing at the very fabric of the air. The ground shook, dislodging stones from the ceiling. I saw with horror that the device was forging a link to something beyond, and thick shadows seeped through the rift. The shadow's presence made the air frigid, and a sense of dread welled up in my gut. We fought desperately, but a surge of darkness roiled from the machine, knocking many of us off our feet. Atira cried out as an unseen force wrenched at her arm. Guards screamed, some pinned to the walls by tendrils of black smoke. Rake, half laughing, half snarling, declared that soon the monarchy would crumble and the planet would be purified under this primal might. Summoning what courage I had, I scrambled to the device, fumbling with wires and couplings, ignoring the stinging static that coursed through my arms. I had never seen such technology, yet it bore enough resemblance to certain Earth-based energy couplers that I managed to sever a crucial link. Sparks flew, and the swirling shadows sputtered. For a moment the horrifying entity receded, but the device was only partially disabled. Rake roared with anger, lunging at me. At the same instant, Atire seized the chance to direct a pulse from her armor at the remaining couplings, overloading them. Another convulsion shook the cavern. The device shattered. The flicker of shadow still lingered in the air, swirling like a living nightmare, but it no longer had a stable gateway. It lashed out in desperation, striking Rake and pulling him into a vortex of darkness. His final scream echoed ominously. Then, with a tremor that nearly caved in the ceiling, the shadows withdrew. We stumbled away from the debris, battered and breathless. Several guards were wounded. Atire slumped against a pillar, tears brimming in her eyes. She stared at the spot where Rake had vanished. Then she closed her eyes, whispering, "I was never ready for this. But if not me, then who?" I knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, unsure if my words could offer any comfort. In the aftermath, we discovered more corridors branching deeper. Though the immediate threat was gone, the machinery scattered throughout the tunnels indicated a massive plot. Rake's group wasn't alone, and the sabotage had been orchestrated for months, if not longer. We found notes and schematics suggesting a larger network of rebels had placed siphoning devices around the capital and beyond. all funneling energy into key points to weaken the core's stability. The near-successful summoning of the shadow entity was meant to coincide with the final breakdown of the planet's energy grid. Shaken but resolute, Achire led us back to the surface. The city above was in disarray, rumors spreading like wildfire about the shadow's attempted return. In the palace, Councillor Dairon initially refused to believe the shadow had nearly been unleashed, yet the battered guards and the broken contraband device told a compelling story. The question now was how to fix the damage. The core's flows were dangerously unstable, and if we did nothing, the planet's equilibrium would collapse. I proposed an idea, part desperation, part improvisation, combining Earth's advanced stabilizers with the ancient energy patterns of the heart's core might buy us time. The catch was that we needed to realign the planet's network of crystal conduits. This process had not been done for centuries, and the method was locked behind archaic rituals. Attire recalled a legend, the heart's vein, a system of conduction lines older than any living memory, rumored to connect every crystal cluster on the planet. If we could awaken it, perhaps the planet's own natural defense would push back the shadow, and maybe, just maybe, we could harness synergy between my salvage tech and Acheron's ancient engineering to seal the breaches. Dairon, of course, opposed the plan. He insisted that meddling with forbidden traditions and letting an outsider manipulate them was an even bigger risk. But Attire, fresh from her direct confrontation with the rebellion and the shadow, was resolute. She declared that we had no choice if we wanted to save Acheron. As we prepared for the final step, I saw the weariness etched in Attire's eyes. She had grown so much in such a short time, forced to face threats that dwarfed normal politics. In turn, I recognized that I had changed too. Once just a pilot forced into an unplanned landing, I now found myself responsible for bridging two worlds' technologies, and I felt an odd protectiveness toward Acheron and its princess, who never asked for these burdens but refused to run from them. The next hours were a flurry of activity. Engineers assembled relic devices from the palace archives, cross-referencing them with data gleaned from my starship's systems. We coded emergency fail-safes in an attempt to handle the planet's unpredictable energy surges. Meanwhile, Attire spread word throughout the kingdom that a major ritual would take place at dawn, calling upon the old ways to restore the heart's vein. The tension in the city soared. Citizens lit small crystal lanterns outside their homes, a sign of hope or prayer. The entire capital fell under a hush, as if holding its breath for what would come next. At the break of dawn, a procession made its way through the city streets. Attire, clad in ceremonial armor that glowed in shifting shades of blue and gold, led the way. I followed close behind, wearing a makeshift harness of cables connected to a portable stabilizer derived from my starship. The city's inhabitants lined the avenue, their gazes a mixture of awe and trepidation. Beyond the walls, the horizon flickered with odd pulses of light, evidence that the planet's energy was in flux, possibly reacting to the approach of the crucial moment. We descended a grand staircase into an underground nexus known as the Heart's Chamber. According to legend, this was the focal point of the entire vein network. The chamber was massive, filled with towering crystal formations that resonated faintly, each with a different pitch. In the center, an ancient pedestal carved from black stone held a swirling sphere of energy, a fraction of the core's essence, visible and vulnerable. Surrounding the sphere were glyphs etched into the floor, lines that formed a complex pattern running outward into the gloom. As Attire moved to the pedestal, I set up the stabilizer equipment. Dairon and other counselors stood off to one side, silent yet watchful, still clearly harboring doubts. Attire knelt and placed her hands on the sphere. Her armor glowed more brightly, and a gentle hum filled the chamber. She began chanting in Acheron's ancient tongue, a slow, melodic incantation that stirred the crystals all around us. The patterns in the floor lit up one by one, and I felt the air crackle with raw power. My stabilizer monitors went wild, indicating huge surges. Then came the quake, a low rumble at first, building into a rolling tremor. Cracks formed in the chamber walls as the planet itself seemed to protest or shift. My device beeped frantically. I fought with the controls, redirecting the flow. If I had miscalculated even slightly, the energy might tear through the entire city. Attire's voice rose, straining, as her entire body trembled under the intensity of the core's resonance. In that moment, a swirl of darkness materialized at the edge of the circle, congealing into the dreaded form of the shadow, still clinging to existence. It sensed the power gathering here and lurched forth to consume it. Horrified, I watched as the entity's tendrils lashed out, seeking to sever the lines of energy that Attire was forging. Guards rushed forward to defend her, but the shadow shrieked in unnatural rage, batting them aside with waves of malevolent force. My mind raced. We had to flood the lines with the planet's own energy faster so that the shadow would be overwhelmed. "Attire, keep going!" I shouted over the roar. "Don't let it break your connection," she grimaced, tears spilling as she fought her own fear. The chamber's crystals pulsed in a synchronized rhythm that accelerated with each breath she took. I slammed my hand onto the controls, diverting more power from the stabilizer to the vein lines. The floor glowed with a brilliant radiance. The shadow shrieked once more, attempting one final lunge, but the spiraling energies erupted upward in columns of light that converged on the entity. With a thunderous crack, the shadow was ripped apart, dispersing into motes of black that dissolved into the air. For several heartbeats, the entire chamber glowed with a white-hot brilliance. Then it dimmed, leaving a shimmering network of renewed conduits etched across the floor, the crystals humming in a harmonious chord. The heart's core spheres stabilized, its swirling energy calm and bright. The silence that followed felt surreal. I realized I was panting, drenched in sweat, and my arms ached from wrestling with the stabilizer. Attire slumped to the side, her armor flickering as it powered down. Darren and the others rushed in to check on her. For a tense minute, I thought she might have expended too much of her life force. But she coughed, opened her eyes, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She was alive and triumphant. Word of the successful ritual spread through the city in waves, igniting a mixture of relief and celebration. By midday, people were gathering in the grand square, lighting crystalline lanterns, not out of fear but in hope and gratitude. The shadow had been driven back, and the planet's lifeblood now flowed through the vein more robustly than it had in years. Scientists and mystics alike recorded new readings that hinted at the core's recovery. Even the sky seemed different, swirling with a slightly more vibrant shade of purple, as though Acheron itself breathed easier. In the palace, an impromptu festival began. Food stalls sprang up, music drifted through the halls, and the tension that had weighed on the city lifted, at least for a time. Princess Attire, though still fatigued, emerged to address her people. She spoke of the courage shown by the guards who fought to protect the city, of the engineers who dedicated themselves to unraveling the sabotage, and of the unity required to restore the heart's core. Then she thanked me. Troy Harrison, the outsider, whose arrival none of them had expected or welcomed. It was a short but poignant mention, and her choice of words, "We found an ally where we feared an enemy," carried a resonance that might reshape how her people viewed humans. Darren, watching from behind the dais, didn't appear pleased, but he also didn't interrupt. I sensed that he was recalculating his stance, realizing that continuing hostility toward me might harm the newly lifted spirits. Later, as a hush fell over the evening sky, Attire and I slipped away from the main festivities to stand on a balcony overlooking the city. Distant lights twinkled like stars fallen to the ground. She leaned on the railing, gazing into the horizon, silent for a while. Then she spoke quietly. "I never wanted this throne, you know. I always believed my mother would rule for centuries more. Now she is gone, and I'm left to fight a threat I barely comprehend." There was a note of vulnerability I hadn't heard before. I told her she had more than proven her worth. She had guided her people, confronted traitors, fought off an ancient evil. "You rose to the challenge," I said, "and that's all any leader can do." She closed her eyes as though savoring the moment's peace, Then she turned to me with a hint of a wry smile. "When you fell from the sky, I thought you were an omen of disaster. Maybe you were. But it seems we needed that shake-up to wake us from our complacency." I chuckled softly. Sometimes fate chooses for us. I was just an unlucky pilot, but something tells me this was never random. The hush that followed felt almost intimate, as though the planet itself recognized that a bond had been forged. We parted ways that night, uncertain of what the future might hold, but hopeful that Acheron and Earth could find a more cooperative path forward. I spent the next few days working with the palace engineers to refine the synergy between my leftover tech and their crystal-based systems. The idea was to ensure that even if another crisis arose, the city could respond swiftly. Meanwhile, Atire oversaw the rounding up of rebel cells. Some surrendered once Rake vanished and the Shadow fiasco was exposed. Others fled into the wilderness, presumably to lick their wounds. The deeper tensions would not vanish overnight. Yet the restoration of the heart's vein gave Acheron a second chance at unifying behind a common purpose. On the day of my planned departure, the entire city seemed to gather near the makeshift landing area where I had repaired my starship, enough for a short-range flight. They watched with curiosity and a hint of melancholy, as though unsure whether to celebrate or mourn my leaving. Atire arrived in her regal armor, polished to a reflective sheen, a single swirl of color marking her heart plate. She carried a crystal that glowed faintly in her palm. Approaching me, she pressed the crystal into my hand and said, "A part of Acheron, so you never forget. Let this remind you that our worlds are now bound in ways we never foresaw." I felt the weight of it, tangible and symbolic. An echo of her earlier statement drifted through my mind. The alien princess wasn't prepared for my arrival, and her response spoke volumes. Indeed, her transformation from a wary guardian of tradition to a leader willing to adapt and embrace new alliances was nothing short of remarkable. Standing there, I offered one final vow, that I would share my experiences with Earth, that I would speak of Acheron's unique harmony and warn of the dangers of ignoring the balance between progress and respect for the living planet we inhabit. She smiled, though sadness lingered in her eyes, and placed a hand on my forearm. "Should Acheron call again, will you come?" she asked. My throat tightened, but I forced a confident reply. "Faster than the fastest starship can travel." Then, with the thrusters igniting behind me, I said my farewells. Ascending skyward, I watched the crystalline spires gleam beneath me. The thought of that swirling shadow still out there, perhaps not fully destroyed, sent a chill through my spine. But for now, Acheron had a chance to heal, and Princess Atire had shown the courage to lead her people forward. In the quiet hum of my cockpit, I clutched the crystal token she had given me. It pulsed faintly, as if resonating with the planet below, reminding me that even in the face of ancient evils and cultural misunderstandings, hope and unity could flourish. I left Acheron's orbit with my heart full of gratitude and a strange longing. I could still see the purple horizon behind me, and in that final glimpse I felt that neither I nor the princess would ever be quite the same again. The boundaries of our worlds had shifted irrevocably, forging a bridge of possibility in the cosmos, and I couldn't help but wonder how soon I might return to that place I'd once feared I'd never escape.